are looking this month at the 2017 film Dunkirk, directed by Christopher Nolan, who you might remember from all the 2000 Batman movies, which, in my opinion, were pretty good. I enjoy them. And he also directed Oppenheimer most recently. Cinematography for this film comes from a Dutch cinematographer. He's Dutch, but he lives here in America. He's done a lot of Hollywood films. Hoyt van Hoytema, and I hope I said that right. Hoyt, if I did not, please email me and correct me. I'd love to talk to you anyway. He is known for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a really good movie, as well as Oppenheimer also. And as a matter of fact, him and Christopher Nolan have done 4 movies together. So this is a good cinematography director team that they have going on. This film stars Fionn Whitehead as Tommy, Kenneth Branagh, who is one of my favorite actors, as Commander Bolton, Harry Styles as Alex, Barry Keoghan as George, Cillian Murphy as the Shivering Soldier. That's the only name I could find listed for him. Apparently he's not mentioned by name in the movie. They just, all the websites call him the Shivering Soldier. And also Tom Hardy as Farrier, who was one of the Spitfire pilots. Principal photography for this film was done between May and July of 2016. All the scenes from Dunkirk were filmed at Dunkirk, but they had to kind of play around with their dates on that. They had to shoot some and then come back later because of Bastille Day and also the Remembrance Day of Dunkirk as well, which was May to June of 1940. So they kind of had to play around with some of the filming dates there. Other scenes were shot in California, particularly all the interior scenes and all the Spitfire scenes when you see the pilot actually in the aircraft. And then some scenes were also filmed in Holland. This movie was distributed by Warner Brothers, released in the UK on July 13th of 2017, here in the States on July 21st of that same year. It had a budget of $100 million. I can remember when the first $100 million budget movie came out back in the 80s. That seems to be the norm nowadays, though. You hope you make a profit. This one certainly did, with just a shade over $530 million in box office receipts. And it had won several Golden Globes and BAFTA awards, but looking at just the Academy Awards themselves, it won for Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Film Editing. So we'll just, as usual, go around the room and see what everybody thought of the film. Sally, what did you think of it?
Now, is this the one where Gary Oldman played Churchill?
No.
I think I mixed up the movie in my head. I know I've seen Dunkirk, and when I saw it, I really liked it because from the historical perspective, I knew very little about that Dunkirk invasion and why it happened. And that was just amazing to me that they pulled it off. So I liked the movie.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. And, no offense, I rib you a little bit. It's not too often you like some of the films that we watch.
It's not. This
Chris,
is one I did.
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Just a question. Didn't Nolan also do Inception and Interstellar?
He did, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know Interstellar also was Hoyt van Hoytema. I can't remember if Inception was as well, but I know Hoyt van Hoytema also did the cinematography for Interstellar as well. That's another one of the collaborations they had.
Yeah. Nolan is one of those directors where if I see his name, I'm interested in seeing the film.
Me too.
Unfortunately, I was kind of disappointed in Dunkirk. I had seen it a few years ago when it came out, and I watched it again, just the other day. There was just something about it that it just didn't hang together for me the way that I thought something like this should. It almost seemed like just a collection of vignettes that were strung together. I also didn't understand the numbers that they were talking about. They were talking about having evacuated like 300,000, And I'm looking at that armada of ships and stuff like that, and all the ones that were going down. I'm trying to, and throughout, I was just trying to figure out how are you dealing with that? Plus the scenes on the beach where they're just all lined up in rows. I don't know. There was a certain unrealism about it for me. Maybe that's the way it was, but it just didn't strike me that under the circumstances where they're trying to evacuate that many people with an onslaught from the Nazi forces, that they would have just been hanging around like that or been able to hang around like that. So, I mean, I thought the cinematography was great, and I thought the individual scenes themselves were really well done, well photographed, and well acted. But to me, the movie just didn't hang together the way Nolan's movies typically do.
Yeah, Chris, I would have to agree with you. You know, excuse me, no sort of plot line, really, no sort of character development, hardly any dialogue. Excuse me again. I thought it was like when this film grew up, it wanted to be The Longest Day. But it never quite grew up. You're right. It just seemed like a bunch of vignettes strung together that sort of told the story. I was talking with my museum director a couple weeks ago about the film, and he said that if you want to know what happened at Dunkirk, there's a great 3-part BBC documentary that is on YouTube and many other channels. If you want to know what happened, watch that. If you want to know how it felt, watch the movie Dunkirk.
Yeah, I can see that this movie gives you that sense of what the soldiers probably felt. I mean, the panic, the sometimes the despair, the fear, the whole thing. But as a coherent movie, it just didn't hang together for me the way I had hoped.
Yeah, and I'm torn as well. I'm not sure if I like it or not. I'm probably leaning more toward I don't like it, simply because just like you, Chris, I was disappointed. I was expecting something more, at least as far as a film goes, especially when you're talking about Christopher Nolan. There's critics out there who say that this is the best war film ever, and I'm just scratching my head. I don't see how that's possible.
No.
This is better than Private Ryan. This is better than Fury. This is better. I mean, I could come up. This is better than Bridge on the River Kwai. You know, I could come up with so many other movies that are far better than this one.
Yeah.
But still, just like you said, the vignettes themselves were entertaining. They were well shot. They kept me engaged. Usually, if I don't like a film, I don't stay engaged very well. This one kept me engaged from start to finish. So that's fine. But yeah, just overall, I wasn't very impressed. And a little bit of background, especially to some of the things that you were talking about, Chris. And you have a picture of the soldiers up there queued up on the beach. You know, proper British queuing. They do it better than nobody else, and that's exactly what they were doing. If you look at historic photographs and things like that, I mean, it's just a colorized version of what was happening in 1940. And they were able to get about 300,000 soldiers off of that beach. Fortunately, because the Germans did not press very hard, and I have to go and look and see why, when they could have basically annihilated the British Army right then and there. They didn't. Just one of the many mistakes that the Germans made in World War II, countless. But yeah, basically what you see in the film is really, how it was when they were out there.
Waiting for the bus.
Pretty much, I mean, what else are you going to do? You got to wait for a boat. You're on a beach. There's really no place to hide unless you go back into the town, which didn't seem like a very good solution. As we saw in the very beginning of the movie, when Tommy and another British soldier, at the very beginning, they are outside the British perimeter, and they're running through the town of Dunkirk. And my first question is, why were they in the town? Why were they not with the rest of the soldiers, at least in a protected area? They're out in the town of Dunkirk itself, getting shot at by Germans and French, simply because they didn't know who was coming around the corner.
All I could figure was that they'd gotten separated from their unit. I mean, otherwise it doesn't make sense that they'd be out there by themselves.
Sally, do you recall that beginning scene?
No, I think I watched the wrong movie. What I'm recalling is a different movie. I don't know what the heck I was thinking.
Gary Oldman is Churchill.
Thought that was,
I can't think of what that film might be. I'd have to go and take a look. In fact,
I know, I can't remember either. I got the wrong one in my head. Oh, well.
I'm curious to which one you watched, though. Chris, the only thing I could think of is that they were, maybe they were trying to scrounge for food or wine, something like that. Maybe I don't want to say that, excuse me, that the British Army was, running through the French village looking through, for money or gold or anything to bring back with them like that. But I think maybe at the beginning, the reason they were outside of the perimeter is because they were trying to find something better than the rations that they had. Like I said, maybe a bottle of wine, a loaf of bread, some cheese, perhaps. And they just ended up in the wrong part of town when the Germans started firing on them. And as they're escaping the Germans, they run into the French fortifications, and the French start firing on them. It doesn't seem like a very smart move for a soldier, but sometimes soldiers don't do very smart things, especially when your belly's grumbling.
yeah, I think the movie Sally's thinking of is Darkest Hour.
That's it.
Power, is it?
Yeah. You're right.
Well, that, if I'm not mistaken, that does come into Churchill's address after the Battle of Dunkirk. His famous, we will fight on the sea, and we will fight on the land, and we will never retreat. And I think he does use the line, "This is our darkest hour, but we will shine through or prevail," or something like that.
Yeah,
maybe that's
even if the island falls, the Empire will continue to fight.
Something like that, yeah.
The other question that I had about the two characters at the beginning was, since all the troops were apparently down on the beach already, looking for the evacuation, why weren't they with that unit why would they have been out scrounging by themselves unless they had been sent out by the unit, but the unit was already out on the beach? It was really puzzling to me why what they were doing out there on their own.
Yeah, and it kind of leading up to some of these other questions that I have. It certainly did seem to me like Tommy and his buddy Gibson, they for lack of a better term, they weren't towing the company line. They were in it for themselves to get off the beach, or at least make life a little bit better for them. And I do have this question. The next question I have, and it's when Tommy and Gibson are bringing the wounded soldier. They get back onto the beach. They finally get behind French fortifications, behind French lines, to somewhere sort of safe. They are able to get this soldier who is on a stretcher. They pick him up and they start running into the ship. At least it seemed to me that they had this every man for himself mentality. And they were just trying to get themselves out of there. And, the guise of being litter bearers, they thought they might be able to get access, to a spot on the deck of one of these ships, which it turns out they didn't. As soon as they dropped the wounded guy off, they were told to get off the ship and go and wait in line like everybody else. But Chris, especially, did you seem to think that they had this kind of, it's just me for myself mentality? And if so, do you think that's surprising, particularly coming into World War II, 1940? I don't know. I thought it was kind of odd myself.
Well, there was a scene just before they get the body of that soldier, where he tries to get in line, and the last soldier in line turns around and says to him, "We're grenadiers." And he wasn't a grenadier, so he was sort of tossed aside. So in a sense, he was an orphan on that whole beach. And so I suppose when you're an orphan, you sort of fight for survival, because you've got nobody else to rely on. So it didn't surprise me that they. I thought it was kind of ingenious of them to think, oh, we can get on if we find a wounded or dead soldier and become bearers for them onto the ship. But I just thought that that scene where he was excluded from one of the lines left him thinking that I'm on my own. Whatever, the only way I'm going to survive is to figure out something to do on my own. I'm not going to have any companions. I'm not going to have any comrades to help me get through.
Yeah, and it seems kind of like he put himself in that position all by his own, from leading his unit to go into the attack.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So after they get the wounded soldier aboard, like I said, Tommy and Gibson are told to get off the ship by the deck commander or whatever. And when they do, they climb, and the first section was called the Mole, and the Mole is the long pier that jetties out into the ocean so that the ships can come up and collect the soldiers. And they climb down underneath the Mole. What do you think they were trying to accomplish by climbing down there?
I thought they were trying to find an alternative way into the ship.
No? Okay.
Maybe that there might have been some kind of porthole on the side somewhere or whatever that would allow them to slip in when they couldn't get in through the top, through the deck. But otherwise, I couldn't see why. I mean, it wasn't like, maybe the only other thing was that if some, some of the German airplanes were coming in and firing machine guns and so on, they were in a hidden place, protected by the ship itself. But other than that, I couldn't see a reason for them to go down there.
Yeah, I was kind of confused on why they made that decision as well. It turns out, though, maybe it was just a stylistic point for the movie, because the ship takes off, it gets torpedoed, it sinks, and all these other soldiers come, rushing back to the Mole, and they're in a position now to start helping these soldiers out of the water,
right,
which was fortuitous. But I'm sure that they didn't, foresee that as they were being kicked off the ship. I just kind of, Sally, I want to kind of go back a little bit to what you said earlier when we were talking about whether we liked the film or not. And you said that you had seen it before, and that you did like it. You remembered you liked it because it gave you that background, that information into, the Dunkirk event. And I think that this movie was really made, of course, it was made for all audiences, but I think it was tailored for a British audience. Like I said, this is May and June of 1940. America has not even entered World War II yet. So we really, here in America, we don't have a collective consciousness about this particular event. We weren't there. It had nothing to do with us. We weren't even in the war yet. And so I think that a lot of Americans, we know the name Dunkirk. We kind of associate it with, getting a lot of soldiers off the beach, and maybe the civilian flotilla that was being launched out of Britain, all these little ships that came out. But yeah, we really don't have, a good memory of it. It's not really something that is taught in our history. But I'm sure, for the British, that this was a monumental event to get so many soldiers off the beach, to be able to rescue their, in a sense, what they did was they rescued their entire army. And brought them back to England so they can live to fight another day. Had the Germans wiped them out on the beaches of Dunkirk, I don't know what the British would have done. They would have been in real bad shape, if not facing an invasion rather quickly. So I can totally see, where you would get the sense that this, from a historical perspective, was something great to watch, because it did kind of give you that background and that information on why this was kind of an important event, particularly for the British, the French as well, Canadians also. I think there was some Australians there, if I'm not, and some Belgians perhaps.
I suspect if they had not successfully evacuated them, that the U.S. would have been in the war much sooner.
Do you know what? I hadn't thought about it like that, but that's a very good.
I wonder.
Very well might be right, Chris. Very well might be right.
I mean, we were already doing Lend-Lease, as I recall, during that period.
Oh, absolutely.
So, if Britain had fallen, I seriously doubt that we would have just sat back and said, "Oh well, nice try."
Payback for 1776.
Right? Yeah.
So the
a little unpleasantness.
Yeah,
a little
right.
unpleasantness back then.
Oh, what was it? Oh, there's a movie. It's sorry, you just reminded me of a great line from Robert De Niro. There's a gangster movie called Ronin, if you've ever seen it.
Ronan, yeah.
And Robert De Niro is talking to a former KGB officer, and the former KGB officer asked him about somebody that they both knew, and he goes, "I don't seem to be back in your neck of the woods during the late unpleasantness." And I just like the way he framed that sentence like that. I digress. So like I said, the first part of the movie was called The Mole. The second part was called The Sea. So now we have the jetty, and this is where all the soldiers are lining up, waiting for the ships. Now we have the sea where the ships are coming from England, not just the Royal Navy themselves, but we also see the beginnings of the little fleet that's coming out to help save these soldiers as well. Mr. Dawson is the owner of a small pleasure yacht, and he has a son with him, whose name is Peter. But at the very beginning, when we meet these characters, they are preparing their yacht to go out to sea, to go to Dunkirk. They know exactly what they're doing and getting into. And they see the Royal Navy coming down the pier, and they seem to be at least putting soldiers on ships, if not requisitioning them altogether. And why do you think, and Mr. Dawson sees this, and he's like, immediately, let's go. Untie the boat. I'm starting it up. We're moving out. We're not waiting for the Royal Navy. Why do you think that he decided to go on his own without waiting for any Royal Navy support?
I think he thought that, my sense was that he was worried that they would be actually commandeering his boat, and that he wanted to be in charge of it, whatever they were going to do. And it might also have been that he thought that they were going to be putting soldiers on his boat to take over, to further buttress the troops that they were actually going to be trying to remove, to evacuate. I just thought he seemed to be the kind of character that very, very patriotic, to start with, but also not somebody who was going to be told how he was going to run his boat.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the sense I got too. I'm the skipper. I own this boat. I sail it. I'm going to go out and do my duty. And he was very patriotic, absolutely, as well as his son, Peter.
Sort of like,
and so I kind of got the same sense as you.
Yeah, it was sort of like, I paid for this boat, you know.
I pay for the upkeep. I pay for the purchase.
Right.
I pay for fuel.
Yeah.
I'm the skipper. I'm
Yeah.
not going to have the Royal Navy come on and start telling me what to do. Right.
If anything happens to it, it's because I did it, not because you did it.
Right. And then so we meet Mr. Dawson. Like I said, we meet his son Peter, but we also meet one of their deckhands, and could possibly be the only deckhand, a teenage boy named George, played by Barry Keoghan. They don't initially think George is going to go with them. They are planning to set sail on their own. George is just kind of helping get the boat ready. But at the last minute, George jumps on the boat just as they're pulling away from the dock. And why do you think Mr. Dawson approved of this? He certainly didn't know George was going to do this, but do you think he was, okay with the decision that George made? Or do you think he would have rather had him stay back?
I thought he wanted him to stay back. I didn't. I definitely got the impression that he did not want. He did not agree with George coming on, but George's insistence that he go on and help. Basically, he overcame that resistance.
Yeah, and to jump on like that just as they're pulling away, there's no way he can go back.
Yeah.
George kind of made the decision for him. Why did George make that decision?
I think that comes back up later in the movie when he's after he's had that horrid accident that ultimately he dies from, where he talks about wanting to do something important, and how his I guess his father had been disappointed in him or something like that, or his teachers had been disappointed in him, and this was his way of trying to do something to show that they were wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see that at the end of the film when Peter submits the newspaper article. He wanted to do something of import. He wanted
Right.
to have everybody know, and I think he specifically said, through a press report or something like that, he wanted everybody in the town to know that he had done something important.
Right.
And so that was the impetus at the end of the film for Peter to submit that to the local paper and have them print it. Because we did lose George about halfway through the film. As Mr. Dawson, Peter, and George are crossing the channel, they come across the shivering soldier, Cillian Murphy, sitting on the very tip of a wrecked hull. I imagine a ship that he was on that got torpedoed. And so they bring him on to the boat. And when Cillian Murphy finds out what they're doing, he is adamant. He wants them to turn that boat around. Why does he not want to go and help all the rest of the troops come back to England?
I think he thought it was a suicide mission. And as a result, he'd already survived one attack. He wasn't interested in surviving any more, or being subjected to any more. And the best way to survive was to turn the boat around and head back.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the question I asked earlier. The every man for himself mentality. He didn't care about the other soldiers that were waiting on the beach to come back. He was just looking out for himself. He wanted that boat turned around. He wanted to go back to England. Damn everybody else. So we start to kind of see a theme that's progressing throughout the film. And there's other instances as well where soldiers are in it just for their own sake. They just want to get back to England. They're not interested in getting everybody back. They're just interested in getting themselves back. And maybe that's part and parcel with just the beginning of the war itself. World War II is definitely not World War I. This is far different. And I don't think, well, I'm not going to say I don't think a lot of nations were prepared. They saw what Germany was doing. They were preparing. But from a mental standpoint, I don't think a lot of the nation's armies that fought initially in World War II were mentally prepared for what was going to happen. Just like the generals in every battle, they're always fighting the last war. Soldiers as well, they always have the last war on their mind. And you start to come into new warfare with new technology and new weapons. I'm sure that has to put the fear of God in you, I would imagine.
Well, it's also, I think it's also that, at the outset of something when like this, when everybody's real patriotic and want to fight for motherland and all that, there's a sense of optimism and bravado that goes with it. I mean, what was it? The civil? I think that was in All Quiet on the Western Front. Similar kind of thing. Everybody thinks that this is going to be a great adventure until it turns out not to be, and then when the reality sets in, there's a whole different mentality that takes hold, and it becomes one of, I want to get out of this thing.
Yeah, and especially since we weren't home by Christmas like they always tell us we were.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. I think that's what strikes me about World War II is it was like the Civil War. People thought it'd be over in a couple weeks and everybody'd be back home having their feast. But World War II dragged on much longer than anyone anticipated. And I think you said the morale just de-escalated.
Yeah, at certain points, it was almost 7 years, World War II. And yeah, at certain points, it can't be a high point every single time. There's got to be your peaks and your valleys. And, this was certainly a British valley. They were soundly defeated on the European coast. They were driven to the sea, literally. And, they were fighting for survival. That's got to be a low point for morale for these troops for sure.
Well, you can kind of see that in the Cillian Murphy character when he's told to go down below deck, and he fights against it because he thinks that, I think my thought was that because he'd already been in this ship that had been torpedoed and had gone down, he had managed to climb up to the top and survive. And I think he probably thought that, being on the upper deck was the way to survive, and that of course leads to George's demise when Cillian Murphy knocks him down the steps and he hits his head.
Yeah, and then Chris, I think we see that in a couple different points in this movie too. A lot of these soldiers, some of them had already, like you said, survived a torpedoing or a sinking of some sort. They do not want to go back below deck again. And quite honestly, I don't blame them, especially when we see that later scene with Tommy and Gibson. When Gibson stays on deck, he's not going below, and you see all those troops packed down below, and they're happy. They're getting, bread with jam. They're getting some coffee, but that happiness is very momentary. And when they start getting strafed by Stukas or starting getting shot at by submarines, you want to be able to escape as soon as you can and not be below decks. That would be horrifying.
Yeah, well, and you can see that that dynamic when what was it, Tommy, I think it was, who was up on deck, goes back and opens the hatch so everybody can get out. The image that I had when you see all those people below deck at that point, all I can think is Titanic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we just talked about that going below deck. These soldiers did not want to. They've seen what happens when people go below deck. Most of them do not come out. And then the third part, and this is something that confused me about the movie too. They titled these sections very clearly. Part 1, the mole. Part 2, the sea. Part 3, the air. But the mole and the sea were so short, and there really wasn't a whole lot of goings on during those sections. I don't think there was really a need to give them like a chapter title, so to speak. And then, the last 3/4 of the movie was the air. There was no other title after that. So I was kind of confused on why Christopher Nolan decided to title these chapters like that. They didn't really seem to correspond with the whole film itself, but even individually on those sections. But like I said,
for me, that kind of contributed to this whole vignette notion that I had out of the movie, that they were these separate things that somehow were supposed to link up, but didn't quite do that for me.
Yeah, for me as well. So part 3 was called The Air. Tommy, Alex, and Gibson. Oh, so they join the Highlanders. So they get on this ship like we talked about. It gets torpedoed. I can't remember if it was Tommy or if it was Gibson, but one of them is on deck. And just before he gets off the boat, he opens the hatch so everybody else down below can at least have some means of escape. Certainly not everybody got out. They make it. They swim all the way back to the shores of Dunkirk, and they get in line again to do it all over again. Which we're sitting here kind of laughing about it, but honestly, if you were in that situation, what else are you going to do? You're not going to swim back to England. That's too far. You swim back to Dunkirk and hope for the best, I suppose. Maybe we shouldn't be laughing, but it does seem kind of comical and ironic, so far removed from the event itself. But
I think that was also the scene where he tries to get on the boat that's going back to the shore, and they toss him off like the rowboat or that's heading back to shore, and he wants to get on, and they keep pushing him off because they say, we don't want to, we're overloaded, we can't take you, and he winds up holding onto the rope that somebody throws him, and he's basically towed back to the shore.
And then once again, it just speaks to this constant theme of individual survival.
Right.
And quite honestly, let's think about this. Do we see that theme through a lot of the movies that we watch? I don't think that we do. I think it's more of a collective survival. The unit is really emphasized. My brothers, I will go back and do anything for them. And it just kind of struck me. I don't know why I didn't think about this before. But that's not the overall feel that you get from this movie. It's an individual instinct rather than a collective instinct.
Right.
Do you think Christopher Nolan was trying to point out that the British weren't the soldiers the Americans were or would have been?
I don't think so at all.
Okay.
I mean, no,
Okay.
no, I could be wrong. You never know, Sally. That's a good point to bring up. But
I'm just
I don't think that's
curious.
what he was doing with this film.
Okay.
He got the inspiration for this film many years before he even started to write it or even think about
Mm,
making it into a motion picture. He was visiting
okay.
the beaches of Dunkirk with his wife. They were just on vacation, and
Oh, okay.
just like yourself, he wanted to know more about what happened here, and so he started doing
Mhm.
research, and he started to
Okay.
develop these ideas into a film.
Okay.
All this bravery and whatnot. But I don't think that he was trying to say anything
Okay.
like that, particularly since Britain had been fighting for probably a year and a
Mhm.
half by this point,
Yeah.
and America, we're still out of the war. We haven't done anything yet. So there was really kind of no comparison, I don't think, at this point in time in 1940 between the two nations' armies. Um,
Mhm.
yeah,
He did it.
I don't think that's the case.
There was one line in the script where I think one of the British soldiers uh, had some real snark about the French.
I
Oh,
wouldn't doubt it. Even to this day, the British soldiers will
Yeah,
snark the French. Those
yeah,
cheesy surrender monkeys.
you're right, exactly. Yeah.
mhm.
Um, so Tommy and Gibson get back on shore. They meet up with this other guy named Alex, who is Harry Styles, who's a Highlander. Um, they see a Highlander group moving down the beach away from everybody else, and they decided to go with them. And it turns out that they were going to this beach fishing trawler that had come in on the tide, and now the tide has come back out. So it's just kind of sitting there lopsided on the beach. They know the tide is coming in, so they're going to go in this trawler, hang out down below, wait for the tide to come in, and try to use this vessel as a means of escape. Germans start shooting at the ship. One bullet. A couple seconds later, another bullet. It's not like they're strafing the ship at all. And I was curious that whole time if the Germans knew that they were in there. I read something that the Germans were actually just doing target practice. But I don't know. It seemed to me that if the Germans could see the ship that's beached enough so they can shoot at it and hit it, they would have seen all these troops moving toward it at some point,
Mhm.
unless I don't know, it was nap time or something. I don't know.
Well, if they were that close to do that, it seems like there would be British troops close enough to start dealing with the other troops down the beach who were standing in line.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it was actually one of the soldiers in the below decks in that trawler that said, "Look at the bullet pattern. They're just doing target practice." I think that's what one of the
Oh, maybe I missed
soldiers
that in the
said.
film because I read that, but I don't recall them saying that in the film. But maybe I just missed it. Maybe I got up to get a glass of water or something.
Anyway, but that's also one of the few scenes I think where there's reluctance to go above get out of the hold.
Yeah, I did. So
There's a
yeah,
battle. They're trying to force somebody to go up, and he's saying, "I don't want to go." And that's when they learn that one of them doesn't speak English. He's French,
yeah, yeah.
which I doubt helped very much.
But the French kid was Gibson. We'd been with this character,
Yeah.
and I don't know, maybe I missed it totally. I didn't know he was French.
Yeah.
But now when they got to that point, I thought back, through what we had already seen, and I was like, yeah, he really hasn't said much.
No, he hasn't said anything. Yeah.
He's just been another body. So I thought that was kind of clever of him to try to disguise himself. But you're right, when they are all down below and they start to pinpoint him, he hasn't spoken. Maybe he's a Nazi spy or something like that. We're going to get him off the ship. We want to get him off anyway because it'll lighten the load. But I thought that was kind of ridiculous too. You got at least a dozen soldiers down there. You're going to take one off, and that's going to make all the difference in getting this ship afloat? I don't think so. You all would have to get.
Yeah, in that rowboat coming back to the shore, yeah, you might have that. You might have that differentiation, but not in a boat the size of that trawler.
Yeah, yeah, with a gas-powered motor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, when he started to go after him like that, I was like, this kind of doesn't make sense to me. One person we haven't talked about yet is Kenneth Branagh's character, Commander Bolton. He is the one that's constantly on the pier, looking out for making sure that the troops are getting on the ships as fast as possible. But he's also formulating plans too. How do you think this character compares to all the characters that we met in the film so far? As far as, and I'll kind of give away what I'm trying to find here, but as far as mentality goes,
he struck me as probably the most realistic one in the film. I mean, he clearly knew that they were in dire straits. At the same time, he wasn't panicking. He was trying to maintain a very calm demeanor. And it didn't matter who he was dealing with, really. He seemed intent on, he had a goal of getting everybody off, and whatever stood in his way, he was going to make sure that was cleared away. And you got the sense of duty at the very end when he says, "I'm staying behind." Pardon?
Why did he stay behind?
No, you get the sense of duty the sense of duty that he sort of exudes throughout this. I thought he exuded throughout this all his scenes, came to the fore at the very end when everybody else is leaving on that last boat, the other senior officer, and Brenna folds the gate down and says, "I'm staying."
Yeah, but why was he staying?
I think because of his sense of duty.
But no, there was a very specific reason. Do you recall?
Oh, no, I don't.
He's staying for the French.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
We've gotten the British out. Now we need to stay behind and make sure
I forgot that.
Get out too. And so,
but the fact that he felt obligated to help the French as well, not just the British, was an indication of his sense of duty.
Yeah, and the point I'm trying to get at is that he seems like the only one in the film, excuse me, who does not have this every man for himself mentality. Yeah. He's thinking of everybody. And you're right, the sense of duty, a sense of honor. And so I think it was a nice contrast between all the other mentalities that we had seen from the characters so far. He wasn't in it just for himself, and he was willing to sacrifice himself in order to make sure that the entire group, both British and French, were getting out. And I thought that was commendable. And I really liked his character during the film. I think he was the only one that had any sort of character development, although no backstories on anybody, nothing at all. We're just meeting these people like we just met them on the streets. But I've always liked Kenneth Branagh. I like his acting style, and I enjoyed him in this film.
I think the only other one that you get any sense of character background was George.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I mean, kind of ironically, the one character who you get to know and and dies.
Yeah, and I think, have we passed it? No, actually, that's my next question. So the shivering soldier, he gets locked in I guess it was a bathroom or a little bedroom below the deck of Mr. Dawson's boat. Peter locks him in, not initially, but he finally gets around to doing it. But I guess he doesn't realize that there's this big hatchet he could just crawl out of, which he does. And he's fighting with Mr. Dawson when he's not turning the ship around. George gets pushed down the stairs and cracks his head on a big metal plate that's right at the bottom of the stairs, which doesn't seem like it was a good ship design, I suppose. Maybe should have put that metal plate somewhere else. But that's neither here nor there. But then we find out later that George dies, right? And the shivering soldier asks Peter a few minutes later, how's the kid doing? He's starting to feel a little remorse. And Peter tells him, oh, he's doing okay. He'll be fine. Why did he lie to him like that?
Well, I think it goes back to earlier when, again, I can't remember the name of the boat captain.
Dawson.
When Dawson tells Peter that the shivering soldier is suffering from shell shock, that he's and he's not in his right mind and so on. And I think Peter had come to understand that if he gave the bad news to Cillian, the Cillian Murphy character, that might trigger something that they didn't need on the ship at that point. And to a certain extent, there was really no point in telling him what had happened at that point. I mean, he couldn't do anything about it. So why make the guy feel worse than he already felt from what had happened to him out on the ship?
Fair. Jumping ahead to the very end of the movie, Peter, they've made it back to England. Peter's getting off his dad's boat. George is laid out there. Cillian Murphy sees the body laid out there. They show his awareness of George dead, laying there on a stretcher covered in a sheet. And then they turn to Peter real quick, and then they turn back, and Cillian Murphy is gone. I was kind of that really perplexed me. I could see not telling him that he's dead when they're on the boat. He doesn't want to start anything. He just wants to get back as seamlessly as possible, as smooth as possible. But once he gets back, he basically, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but he essentially let a murderer off the hook. Of course, they're all murderers. That's what soldiers do. That's, part and parcel of being a soldier in war. But this is a little different. And I did not like the fact that Cillian Murphy was just allowed to walk away like that.
Mm.
But that's just my 2 cents. Sorry.
I thought it was interesting too that that the sense of the soldiers who evacuated was that they were going to be greeted as cowards when they got home.
Mhm.
And instead, when they're on the train, all of a sudden they see that everybody's cheering them. I thought that was an interesting. I mean, I didn't really know what to make of that, other than that. I guess when you're in the middle of when you feel you personally have failed, you think everybody else is going to think you failed, when in fact they're just elated to have you home.
Yeah. No, and I can see exactly where you're coming from, Chris. And how they probably did feel like that. They felt like losers. They got whooped by the Germans. They had to, make a retreat that was almost embarrassing. They did it, which was, a great credit to them. But yeah, when you get back home, you're not going to feel like you're going to be very welcome. You're going to feel like a failure. Yeah.
Well, I think as I watched that, I was thinking about how, the troops coming home from Vietnam felt. That, there were no parades, and people, just feeling like they'd been fighting in a losing war, and that they were losers themselves. It took, a couple of decades or more to get out of that.
And I guess the contrast between the two is that, when you said, the soldiers that came back from Dunkirk, they saw the civilian population welcoming them back. We didn't get that in Vietnam.
Right.
Quite different. So I'm sure that mentality stuck around for a lot longer and hurt a lot more because of the reception that they got when they came home.
Yeah.
One thing I thought was interesting about this film and Christopher Nolan's approach, I was reading an interview with him, and he said that in all of his research leading up to writing this script, he found that a vast majority of these soldiers that were evacuated out of Dunkirk were young and inexperienced. And that's, when you don't think about it like that, but when he says it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. It's right at the beginning of the war. Yes, you have some sort of standing army, but when World War II comes around for all nations, it builds up this sense of morale and pride. And so, the ranks are just over full with all these new soldiers. And so he said that he wanted to maintain that sort of spirit in the film. And that's why you see all these actors who are young and are basically unheard of. He was trying to emulate what the soldiers in Dunkirk, or who they were, by using young and unheard of actors in the film. And I just thought that it was kind of a neat take by the director to kind of take that approach in order to maintain that sort of consistency, reality versus Hollywood.
And I thought it was kind of interesting too, how many extras they had to have for this for this film.
I did I make that note? I did. I think it was like 3, 4, 5,000 extras that they had to employ,
Mm,
especially for some of those beach scenes.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Just massive amounts of people, massive amounts. Oh, and one thing he did as well was there is a little bit of CGI in the movie, but
Mm,
not very much at all.
yeah.
Watching the film myself, I was like, oh, this is overload CGI. No, him and the cinematographer and the special effects team got together, and a lot of the stuff that you see in the film, they were actually filming and doing live and in person, which really impressed
Yeah.
It
me.
is.
Let's see. So we talked about that. We did talk a little bit about Hoyt Van Hoyten's cinematography. Probably one of the best parts of the movie. He was nominated for an Academy Award for this film. He did not win it, but he was awarded or nominated. I mean, oh, Chris, here it is right here. More than 6,000 extras were used in the production of this film.
Yeah.
And of course, I asked, a very obvious question from the director's standpoint. How difficult do you think that would be? And I'm sure, and when you think about it, it's probably not even the director. I'm sure that there are people under the director who are in charge of this section, corralling all these people here, this section corralling all these people
Yeah.
here. But just the monumental effort of having it at some point, or maybe different points throughout the filming, 6,000 extras.
Yeah.
Can't even imagine.
And telling each one what to do. That's
Yeah, and that's when you get the Cecil B. DeMille impression,
Right,
somebody
yeah.
standing up on a block or something with a megaphone, just
Yeah.
shouting, Group A, you're supposed to do this now, and Group D, or with 6,000 extras, probably Group S, all the way down the line. It just sometimes these directors really impress me, even if their film isn't as striking or as impactful as I was hoping it would be. Some things like that, when you read about it, you're just like, wow, oh my gosh.
I mean, one of the scenes that impressed me for how they must have handled it was when on the mole, when they're bearing the soldier on the stretcher through the packed soldiers on the mole, how they managed to do that, along with the camera following them through and the whole thing, getting the soldier, making sure that everybody could move out of the way just at the right time. And that's the kind of scene that you think that's where I guess the director earns his money.
I'm sure they probably did a few takes of that. I'm sure there's a few trips and falls and tumbles.
Yeah.
The last question I'm asking about the whole filmmaking process, did you notice the score of the film at all?
Yes.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. There were times when I thought that it sort of took over the film in a way that I didn't particularly care for.
Did you see it in a theater at all at any point?
I think I did see it in the theater the first time around, when it came out. I haven't been to a theater since COVID, but so this is pre-COVID. So yeah, I wouldn't have been, streaming it or anything. I don't even know if we had streaming at that point in 2017 or whenever. So I know I'd seen it earlier, and I think I would have seen it in the theater, though I don't have a specific memory of it. But as I was watching it the other night, the music at various points for me didn't kind of sync with what was happening on the screen. It just, there was something off about it, and I don't know how to characterize it, but it just didn't, it wasn't working for me at that point. But for most of the movie, it was I thought very subtle in the background.
I didn't even notice the score at all until after the movie was over with and I was doing something else. I was like, wait a minute, there was music. I just don't, it just never stood out to me. But you bring up a good point, how the music in points distracted you, or was too much. Not only have I talked to people who did see it in theaters, they remember it vividly, but also, reading different movie reviewers' notes about the film as well. They said that if you saw it in a theater, there was points when the score was so overbearing, simply because of the editing, and it did win for best sound editing, which is kind of it doesn't gel. But they said that the score was so overbearing when you saw it in the theater that it blocked out some of the dialogue, and it took attention away from what was happening on the screen. Some people have said that the bass even was so much that it gave them a headache. So I'm kind of, I don't know, not really surprised, but maybe a little surprised that I didn't even notice it throughout the film. Maybe I was just so engrossed in the visuals that I didn't happen to notice the music at all.
Well, maybe it's also a function of that it comes across differently when you're streaming it.
Yeah, for sure. And I have little speakers that are plugged into my TV. They're rather robust, but it's certainly not speakers all down the side of the theater that are blaring at.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not so sure, I always close this out with who is your favorite actor and why. I'm not so sure that we can get there with this film.
Yeah.
I don't know. Chris, what do you think?
Well, I tend to think with you that Branagh's character was the most developed in the movie. So it's kind of hard to think of anything else when you come right down to it. I mean, it's an ensemble movie in a way that we don't typically think of ensemble movies, because the ensemble is like 6,000 extras,
And at least, some stars that you heard of. Of course, we've heard of Cillian Murphy now, but
Right.
I don't think in 2017,
Never heard of him.
Kenneth Branagh certainly was by, at
Yes.
that point, but maybe he was the only one.
I don't think
Barry
Tom Hardy
Keoghan.
was all that well known.
No.
So
I guess if I had to pick a favorite character, I would say Tom Hardy, simply because I did enjoy the flying scenes, except for the very last one where he's like, he's just like coasting in the air for 10 minutes. I heard that there were instances of that happening. I'm not even remotely sold that you can, do that for that long. Right. Where you can circle across the beach a few times and take out a bomber after you've already run out of gas. I just thought it was a little far-fetched.
That was one of the things that distracted me at the very end. This idea that he's just constantly coasting and coasting and coasting and coasting, and is able to get the wheel down just in time to land without crashing. The whole thing.
It just seemed a little too much for me.
Yeah.
Sally, do you remember any characters from the film? Maybe.
Well, since I was watching a different movie, no.
Gary Oldman.
I'm in my mind.
Yeah, Gary Oldman's great. Yeah.
The one I saw was good. The one you're talking about, I don't know.
Well, I will definitely give Darkest Hour a watch. I don't think I've seen that one yet, so maybe since we have the long weekend, I'll go back and watch that this weekend if I can find it. The next film night that we're going to have is going to be October. At the end of October, we are going to revisit The Raid, which we didn't get to do. I think it was November of last year.
Right,
something like that.
Got canceled because of some technical problem.
Yeah, I couldn't get Zoom to work. It just was not coming up for me. So that's something that Chris has been mentioning, and I've wanted to go back. We all seem to enjoy that film. It was kind of like a surprise.
Yes, it was odd.
So that's what we'll be looking at in October. And until then, we do have trivia night coming up on the 17th of September. So if you are interested in our trivia, we'd like to see you for that. And then, of course, I've got both of you here. I'm not really selling it to a wider audience, but cemetery tour registration is open now as well. If you have been to our cemetery tours and you enjoy them, or if you've never been but have heard good things and are curious about what it's all about, we'd love to see you come out. It is weekend of October 12th and 13th. Saturday the 12th is our candlelit tours that we do at night, which is really something to see. We light up different parts of the cemetery. The entire route that we take is lit up by luminaries. I'm not trying to toot our own horn here, but I think we do a fantastic job on those candlelit tours. And then Sunday the 13th is the daylight public tours as well. So if you've never been to any of our cemetery tours, or if you have been and enjoyed it and want to come back out, registration is now open. You can sign up. And aside from those two events, if I don't see you at either one of those, I look forward to seeing you again